Chapter 22. In the shaded seclusion of her room, buried face down deep into the soft cushions of her couch, Madeline Hammond lay prostrate, quivering under the outrage she had suffered. The afternoon wore away. Twilight fell. Night came. And then Madeline rose to sit by the window to let the cool wind blow upon her hot face. She passed through hours of unintelligible shame and impotent rage and futile striving to reason away her defilement. The trail of brightening stars seemed to mock her with their unattainable passionless serenity. She had loved them, and now she imagined she hated them and everything connected with this wild, fateful, abrupt West. She would go home. Edith Wayne had been right. The West was no place for Madeline Hammond. The decision to go home came easily, naturally, she thought, as the result of events. It caused her no great mental strife. Indeed, she fancied she felt a relief. The great stars, blinking white and cold over the dark crags, looked down upon her, and as always, after she watched them for a while, they enthralled her again. Under western stars, she mused, thinking a little scornfully of the romantic destiny they had blazed for her idle sentiment. But they were beautiful. They were speaking. They were mocking, and they drew her. Ah, she sighed. It will not be so easy to leave them after all. Madeline closed and darkened the window. She struck a light. It was necessary to tell the anxious servants who knocked that she was well and required nothing. A soft step on the walk outside arrested her. Who was there? Nels or Nick Steele or Stillwell? Who shared the guardianship over her now that Monty Price was dead, and that other, that savage? It was monstrous and unfathomable that she regretted him. The light annoyed her. Complete darkness fitted her strange mood. She retired and tried to compose herself to sleep. Sleep for her was not a matter of will. Her cheeks burned so hotly that she rose to bathe them. Cold water would not alleviate this burn. Then, despairing of forgetfulness, she lay down again with a shameful gratitude for the cloak of night. Stuart's kisses were there, scorched upon her lips, her closed eyes and her swelling neck. They penetrated deep and deeper into her blood, into her heart, into her soul. The terrible farewell kisses of a passionate, hardened man. Despite his baseness, he loved her. Late in the night, Madeline fell asleep. In the morning, she was pale, but in a mental condition that promised composure. It was considerably after her regular hour that Madeline repaired to her office. The door was open, and just outside, tipped back in a chair, sat Stillwell.
"Morning, Miss Majesty,"
he said, as he rose to greet her with his usual courtesy. There were signs of trouble in his lined face. Madeline shrank, inwardly feeling his old lamentations about Stuart. And then she saw a dusty, ragged pony in the yard, and a little bureau drooping under a heavy pack. Both animals bore evidence of a long, arduous travel. "Who do those belong to?" asked Madeline.
"Them critters? Why, Danny Maine's,"
replied Stillwell with a cough that betrayed embarrassment. "Danny Maine's?" echoed Madeline wonderingly.
"Well, I said so."
Stillwell was indeed not himself.
"Is Danny Maine's here?"
she asked in sudden curiosity. The old cattleman nodded gloomily.
"Yeah, he's here, all right. He sloped in from the hills, and he hollered to see Bonita. He's loco, too, about that little black-eyed hussy. Why, he hardly said, 'Howdy, Bill,' before he begun asking wild and eager questions. I took him in to see Bonita. He's been here for more than a half hour now."
Evidently, Stillwell's sensitive feelings had been ruffled. Madeline's curiosity changed to blank astonishment, which left her with a thrilling premonition. She caught her breath. 1,000 thoughts seemed thronging for clear conception in her mind. Rapid footsteps were accompanied of clicking spurs that sounded in the hallway. Then a young man ran out into the porch. He resembled a cowboy in his lithe build, his garb and action, in the way he wore his gun, but his face, instead of being red, was clear brown tan. His eyes were blue, his hair was light and curly. He was a handsome, frank-faced man. At the sight of Madeline, he swept down his sombrero, and leaping at her, he possessed himself of her hands. His swift violence not only alarmed her, but painfully reminded her of the something she wished to forget. This cowboy bent his head and kissed her hands and wrung them, and when he straightened up, he was crying. "Miss Hammond, she's safe, and almost well, and what I feared most ain't so. Thank God," he cried. "Sure, I'll never be able to pay you for all you've done for her. She's told me how she was dragged down here, and how Jean tried to save her, and how you spoke up for Jean and her too. How Monty at the last he had to throw his guns. Poor Monty. We were good friends, Monty and I. But it wasn't friendship for me that made Monty stand in there. He would have saved her anyway. Monty Price, he was the whitest man I ever knew. There's Nels, and Nick, and Jean. He's been some friend to me, but Monty Price, he was grand. He never knew any more than you or Bill here or the boys what Bonita was to me." Stillwell's kind and heavy hand fell upon the cowboy's shoulder.
"Danny, what's all this queer jabbing?" he asked. "And you're kind of taking some liberties there with Miss Hammond, who's never seen you before. Sure, I'll make some allowances for some amazingly strange talk, and I see you're not drinking. Maybe you're just plumb locoed. Come on, ease up now and talk some sense."
The cowboy's fine, frank face broke into a smile. He dashed the tears from his eyes, and then he laughed. His laugh was a pleasant, boyish ring, a happy ring.
"Bill, old pal, you bridle down for a minute, will you?" Then he bowed to Madeline. "I beg your pardon, Miss Hammond, for theming rudeness. I'm Danny Mains, and Bonita is my wife. I'm crazy glad she's safe and unharmed. So grateful to you that, why, it's sure's a wonder I don't kiss you outright." "Bonita, your wife?" ejaculated Stillwell. "Sure, we've been married for months," replied Danny happily. "Gene Stewart did it. Good old Gene, he's hell on marrying. I guess maybe I hadn't come to pay him up for all he done for me. You see, I've been in love with Bonita for 2 years, and Gene, you know Bill, what a way Gene has with girls. Well, he was trying to get Bonita to have me."
Madeline's quick, varying emotions were swallowed up in the boundless gladness. Something dark and deep and heavy and somber flooded from her heart. She had a sudden rich sense of gratitude towards this smiling, clean-faced cowboy whose blue eyes flashed through tears.
"Danny Mains,"
she said, smiling.
"If you're as glad of your news as you've made me, if you really think I merit such a reward, you may kiss me outright."
With a bashful wonder, but with a right hearty will, Danny Mains availed himself of this gracious privilege. Stillwell snorted. The signs of his phenomenal smile were manifest, otherwise Madeline would have thought that snort was an indication of furious disapproval.
"Bill, straddle a chair," said Danny. "You've gone back a heap these last few months fretting over your bad boys, Danny and Gene. You'll need support under you while I'm throwing my yarn. Story of my life, Bill."
He placed a chair for Madeline.
Miss Hammond, begging your pardon again, I want you to listen also. You've the faith of an eyes of a woman who loved to hear of other people's happiness. Besides, somehow it's easy for me to talk looking at you.
His manner subtly changed then. Possibly it took on a little swagger. Certainly he lost the dignity that he had shown under the stress of feeling, and he was now more like a cowboy about to boast or effect some stunning maneuver. Walking off the porch, he stood before the weary horse and burro.
"Play it right out," he exclaimed.
Then, with the swift violence so characteristic of men of his class, he slipped the pack from the burro and threw saddle and bridle from the horse.
"There, see 'em? Take a look at the last doggone weight you've ever packed. You've been some faithful to Danny Main, and Danny Main pays. Never a saddle again, or a strap or halter or hobble so long as you live. So long as you live on nothing but grass and clover, and cold water in shadowy places and dusty swales to roll in and rest and sleep."
Then he untied the pack, and taking a small, heavy sack from it, came upon the porch. Deliberately, he dumped the contents of the sack at Stillwell's feet. Piece after piece of rock thumped upon the floor. The pieces were sharp, ragged, evidently broken from a ledge. The body of them was white in color, with yellow veins and bars and streaks. Stillwell grasped at one rock after another, staring and stuttering. Putting the rocks to his lips, he dug in through them with his shaking fingers. Then he lay back in his chair, head against the wall, and as he gaped at Danny, the old smile began to transform his face.
"Well, Lord, Danny, if you ain't gone and struck her rich."
Danny regarded Stillwell with lofty condescension.
"Some rich. Now, Bill, what we got here, say offhand?" "Oh, Lord, Danny, I'm afraid to say. Look, Miss Majesty, just look at the gold. I've seen other prospectors and gold miners for 30 years. I never seen the beat of this." "It's the lost mine of the Padres," cried Danny, "and belongs to me."
Stillwell made some incoherent sound as he sat up fascinated, quite beside himself.
"Bill, it was some long time ago since you saw me. Fact is, I know how you felt, 'cause Gene, he kept me posted. I happened to run across Bonita, and I wasn't going to let her ride away alone when she told me she was in trouble. So we hit the trail for the Plancos. Bonita had Gene's horse, and she was to meet him up there on the trail. We got to the mountains all right, nearly starved for a few days till Gene found us. He got in trouble himself and couldn't fetch much back with him. We made for the quags and built us a cabin. I came down the day Gene sent his horse Majesty to you. Never saw Gene so broken-hearted. Well, after he sloped for the border, Bonita and I was hard put by to keep alive, but we got along, and I think it was then she began to care a little for me, because I seemed to be kind of decent, I guess. I killed cougars and went down to rodeo to get bounties for the skin and bought grub and supplies I needed. Once I went to El Cajon and run plumb into Gene. He was back from the revolutioning and cutting up some, but I got away from him after all doing I could do to drag him out of town. A long time after that, Gene trailed up to the crags and found us. Gene, he had stopped drinking, and he had changed wonderful, with fine and dandy. It was then he began pestering the life out of me to make me marry Bonita. And I was happy, and so was she, and I was a little scared of spoiling it. Bonita had been a little flirt, and I was afraid she'd get shy of a halter, so I bucked against Gene. But I was all locoed, and as it turned out, Gene would come up occasionally packing supplies for us, and always he'd get after me to do the right thing by Bonita. Gene, he's so doggone hard to buck against. I had to give in, and I asked Bonita to marry me. Well, she wouldn't at first, said she wasn't good enough for me. But I saw the idea of marriage was working deep, and I kept on being the decentest as I could. So, it was my wanting to marry Bonita, my being glad to marry her, that made her kind of grow soft and sweet and pretty, as a mountain quail. Gene, he fetched up Padre Marcos, and he had us married.
Danny paused in his narration, breathing hard, as if the memory of the incident described had stirred strong, thrilling feelings in him. Stillwell's smile was rapturous. Madeline leaned forward towards Danny with her eyes smiling.
Miss Hammond, and you, Bill Stewart, now you listen, for this is strange, I gotta tell you. The afternoon Bonita and I were married, when Gene and the Padre were gone, I was happy one minute, then low-hearted the next. I was miserable because I got a bad name. I couldn't buy even a decent dress for my pretty wife. Bonita heard me, and she was some mysterious. She told me the story of the lost mine of the Padres, and she kissed me and made joyful over me in the strangest way. I knew marriage went to women's heads, and I thought even Bonita had a spell. Well, she left me for a little, and when she came back, she wore some pretty yeller flowers in her hair. Her eyes were big and black and beautiful, and she said some queer things about spirits rolling rocks down the canyon. Then she said she wanted to show me where she always sat and waited and watched for me when I was away. So she led me around under the crags through a long slope. It was some pretty back there, clear and open, with a long sweep, and desert yarnin' dark and red, and there were yeller flowers on the slope, and the same thing she had in her hair, the same kind that Apache girl wore hundreds of years ago when she led the Padre to the gold mine. When I thought of that, I saw Bonita's eyes, and I heard the strange cracking of rolling rocks, and I heard them rattling down and roll and grow faint. I was thumb out of my mind, but not for long. Them rocks were rolling all right, only it was the weatherings of the cliff. And there, under the crags, was a gold pocket. Then I was worse than loco. I went gold crazy. I worked like 17 donkeys. Bill, I dug a lot of gold-bearing quartz, and Bonita watched the trail for me and brought me water. That was how come she come to be caught by Pat Haw and his guerrillas. Sure, that Pat Haw was all set on doing Gene dirt that he mixed up with Don Carlos. And Bonita would tell you some staggering news about that outfit. Just now, my story is all gold, though.
Danny Maines got up and kicked back his chair. Blue lightning gleamed from his eyes as he thrust forward a hand toward Stillwell.
Bill, old pal, put her there and give me your hand, he said. You was always my friend, and you had faith in me. Well, Danny Maines, he owes you, and he owes Gene Stewart a good deal, and Danny Maines pays. I want 2 partners to help me work my gold mine, you and Gene. If there's any ranch hereabouts that takes your fancy, I'll buy it. If Miss Hammond ever gets tired of her range and stalking home, I'll buy them for Gene. If there's any railroad or town roundabout she'd likes, I'll buy it for her. If I see anything for myself that I'll like, I'll buy it. You go out and find Gene for me. I'm aching to see him and tell him. Go fetch him, right here in this house, and with my wife and Miss Hammond as witnesses, we'll draw up a partnership. Go find him, Bill. I want to show him this gold and show him how Danny Maines pays. And the only bitter drop in my cup today is that I can't pay Monty Price.
Madeline's lips trembled, forming to tell Danny Maines and Stillwell that the cowboy they wanted so much had left the ranch. But the flame of fine loyalty that burned in Danny's eyes, The happiness that made the old cattleman's face at once amazingly beautiful stiffened her lips. She watched the huge Stillwell and the little cowboy, both talking wildly, as they walked off arm in arm to find Stuart. She imagined something of what Danny's disappointment would be, of the elder man's consternation and grief when he learned Stuart had left for the border. At this conjuncture, she looked up to see a strange yet familiar figure approaching. Padre Marcos. Certainly it was that Madeline felt herself trembling. What did his presence mean on this day? He had always avoided meeting her whenever possible. He had been exceedingly grateful for all she had done for his people, his church, and himself, but he had never thanked her in person. Perhaps he had come for that purpose now, but Madeline didn't believe so. Mention of Padre Marcos, the sight of him, had always occasioned Madeline a slight definable shock, and now, as he stepped to the porch, a shrunken, stooped, and sad-faced man, she was startled. The Padres bowed low to her.
"Signora, will you grant me audience?"
he asked. In perfect English, his voice was low-toned and grave.
"Certainly, Padre Marcos," replied Madeline as she led him into her office.
"May I close the door?"
he asked. "It is a matter of great moment, which you might not care to have one hear." Wonderingly, Madeline inclined her head. The Padre gently closed one door and then the others.
"Signora, I have come to disclose a secret, my own sinfulness in keeping it, and to implore your pardon. Do you remember that night Signor Stuart dragged me before you in the waiting room in El Cajon?"
"Yes, I do,"
replied Madeline.
"Signora, since that night you have been Signor Stuart's wife."
Madeline became as motionless as stone. She seemed to feel nothing, only to hear.
"You are Signor Stuart's wife. I have kept the secret under fear of death, but I could not keep it no longer. Signor Stuart may kill me now. Signora, it is very strange to you. You were so frightened that night you knew not what happened. Signor Stuart, he threatened me, he forced you. He made you speak the service, he made you speak the Spanish, yes, and I, Signora, know the deeds of these sinful cowboys, fearing worse than disgrace to one so beautiful and so good as you. I could not do less than marry you truthfully. At least, you should be his wife. So I married you truly in the service of my church."
"Oh, my!"
cried Madeline, rising. "Hear me, I implore you, Signora, hear me out. Do not leave me, do not look so. Oh, Signora, let me speak a word for Signor Stuart. He was drunk that night. He did not know what he was about. In the morning he come to me, made me swear by my cross that I would not reveal the disgrace he had put upon you. If I did, he would kill me. Life is nothing to the American vaquero, Signora. I promised to respect his command, but I did not tell him you were his wife. He did not dream I had actually married you. He went to fight for freedom of my country, Signora. He is a splendid soldier, and I brooded over the sin of my secret. If he were killed, I need not never tell you, but if he lived, I knew that I must some day. Strange indeed that Signor Stuart and Padre Marcos should both come to this ranch together. The great change your goodness wrought in my beloved people was no more greater than the change in Signor Stuart. Signora, I feared you would go away one day, go back to your eastern home and ignorant of the truth. The time came when I confessed to Stuart and said I must tell you. Signora, the man, he went mad with joy. I have never seen such supreme joy. He threatened no more to kill me. That
strange, cruel vaquero begged me not to tell the secret, never to reveal it. He confessed his love for you, a love something like the desert storm. He swore by all that was once sacred to him and by my cross and my church that he would be a good man and he would walk worthy to have you. You need never have known, so I held my tongue, half pitying him, half feared of him, and prayed for some God-sent light. Signora, it was a fool's paradise that Stuart lived in. I saw him often. When he took me up in the mountains to have me marry that wayward Bonita and her lover, I came to have respect for a man whose ideas about nature and life and God were in variance with mine. But the man is a worshipper of God in all matter of things. He is part of the wind, the sun, desert, mountain that have made him. I have never heard more beautiful words than those in which he persuaded Bonita to accept Signor Maines, to forget her old lovers and henceforth be happy. He is their friend. I wish I could tell you what this means. It sounds so simple. It really is simple. All great things are so. For Signor Stuart, it is natural to be loyal to his friend, to have a fine sense of honor due to a woman who had loved and given, to bring about their marriage, to succor them in need and loneliness. It was natural for him to never speak of them. It would have been natural for him to give his life in their defense if peril menaced them. Signora, I want you to understand that to me the man has the same stability, the same strength, the same elements which I am in the habit of attributing to physical life around me in this wild and rugged desert. Madeline listened as one under a spell. It was only that the soft-voiced, eloquent priest seemed to know how to move the heart, stir the soul, but to his defense, his praise of Stuart, if they had been couched in the crude speech of cowboys, would have been glory to her. Signora, I pray you, do not misunderstand my mission. Beyond my confession to you, I have only a duty to tell you of the man whose wife you are. But I am a priest, and I can read the soul. The ways of God are inscrutable, and I am only a humble instrument. You are a noble woman, and Signor Stuart is a man of desert iron forged anew in the crucible of love. Signor Stuart swore he would kill me if I betrayed him, but he will not lift his hand against me, for the man bears you a very great and pure love, and it has changed him. I no longer fear his threat, but I do fear his anger, should he ever know I spoke of his love, of his fool's paradise. I have watched his dark face turn to the sun setting over the desert. I have watched him lift it to the light of the stars. Think, my gracious noble lady, think what is his paradise. To love you above the spirit of the flesh, to know you as his wife, his never to be another except by his sacrifice, to watch you with secret glory of joy and pride, to stand while he might between you and evil, to find his happiness in service, to wait, with never a dream of telling you, for the hour to come when to leave you free he must go out and get himself shot. Signora, this is beautiful. It is sublime. It is terrible. It has brought me to you with my confession. I repeat, Signora, the ways of God are inscrutable. What is the meaning of your influence upon Signor Stuart? Once he was merely an animal, brutal, unquickened. Now he is a man. I have not seen his like. So I beseech you, in my humble office as priest, as a lover of mankind, before you send Stuart to his death, to be sure there is here no mysterious disposition of God. Love, that mighty and blessed unknown thing, might be at work. Signora, I have heard that somewhere in the rich eastern cities you are a very great lady. I know you are a good and noble. That is all I want to know. To me, you are only a woman, the same as Signor Stuart is only a man. So I pray you, Signora, before you let Stuart give you freedom at such a cost, be sure you do not want his love, lest you cast away something sweet and noble which ye yourself have created.
End of chapter 22.